Hello, my name is Nicholas Alexander Fields, and today I'd like to take you on a tour of my final History 396 project. That project being the psychological and emotional effects on slaves uh, as a result of slavery. Um, Now, I came up with this topic maybe a week or two after the actual assignment was presented to us as a class, and it was a result of two things. Me wanting to try to focus on something that both the history community, myself being a history major, and college students in general don't really focus on the emotional side of slavery, the psychological side. Um, and on the other hand, it was also brought about by my own mental maladies, if you will. I suffer from severe depressive disorder, as well as severe anxiety, both social and otherwise. Um, and one evening, I was sitting by myself, going through one of these bouts of depression, and I thought, if I feel like this today, as a free African American in the modern United States, how were these emotions felt and projected during slavery? Not only that, how did slaves cope with these feelings? Because, again, as a free man in this modern time, I have the luxury to go out and talk to a physician or a counselor or my friends, what have you, and get these feelings worked out. But this isn't or wasn't an option for slaves. Sad to say, no one really cared about how a slave felt, as they were thought as property, and property did not have feelings. So they thought. And I feel like this is carried over into the way we study history and the way we study slavery. Because we do think of slaves as people, of course, because we have a better view of the world, and hindsight is 2020. Excuse me. But we still don't really take into account how slavery really affected the individual. So one of the goals for this project, for myself, was to take the macro issue of slavery and to do a micro sort of analysis of it. To do this, I went through various memoirs, personal accounts, etc., to get a snapshot of what a slave went through as an individual, both working within the slave system and then escaping from it, and various incidents within their lives, to try to get a better idea of the harm outside of the physical element that we are so painfully aware of. Um, Now, when I think of challenges that I went through building this project, I go back to the memoirs and just the research that I went through, because finding personal accounts that really got to the point of what I wanted this project to accomplish was difficult, because even when a slave could read or write, it seemed they weren't unable to get to what they felt, but there were more important things going on than talking about how they felt. Usually these pertain to escaping and their day-to-day activity. Luckily I was able to narrow down about 10 of these memoirs to put into my project that struck at the main point. Another challenge I had was the psychological research I had to do. mainly because as I talk about in my about section, I am a history major. I minor in women's studies and law and society. I don't particularly have a psychological background, so in order to get all of this analysis done, I had to sit down with people that studied psychology or go through the tomes that are the psychological encyclopedias and really sit down and look at my 10 items and think, okay, so this event happened, this event happened, this event happened, according to this psychological encyclopedia or according to this person that I'm discussing this with. These are the results psychologically and emotionally. And from there, I picked the best 5 items that I have that I'd like to present in this particular tour. So we will move on to browse the items. So the first item I'd like to talk about is 12 Years a Slave, the story of Solomon Northup, that was relatively recently turned into a major motion picture. Now, this, along with Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, which I'll talk about later, strikes at the heart of separation anxiety and the depression of being taken from one life and being placed into this brutal system. And one thing about the book, which I read for this project, and the movie, was the fact there are a lot of smaller sections that he dictated that weren't involved in the movie. In the book, in some parts, he talks about just the sadness he felt and what that sadness made him want to do. At one point, he does discuss suicide, and he does discuss losing the will to keep going, but being brought back by the thought of his family and reuniting with them, and that being the driving force of what kept him together. And I found that to be very interesting and very confusing, because this seems like something that should be in the motion picture that they decided to leave out. That didn't sit well with me personally, but being able to read the book, and really brought the effect of some slaves did in fact kill themselves. They were able to look at their current situation, think about how they felt, and rationalize the idea of killing themselves. Not unlike Solomon Northup, some of them didn't have that thought, that driving force of, okay, I have to stay alive for this reason, or I have to stay alive for that reason. And the severe separation anxiety he felt, being separated from his family, his livelihood for so long, was something so hard to fight through that, fortunately enough for both himself and his family, he managed to do. The next item I'd like to talk about are Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Now, this again focuses on separation anxiety, as it is one of the tags, but also I'd like to talk about the emotional damage done by the harassing owner of Harriet Jacobs, because it really was an emotional type of abuse. As mentioned in the book and one of the videos we watched in class, Harriet Jacobs' owner constantly harassed her, reminded her that he was her owner. She was his property, and whether she liked it or not, eventually she would fold to his wishes. Which, when you really think about it, is deeply troubling. As troubling as the sexual assault you can see in something like 12 Years a Slave is, just the constant reminder that you aren't a person, being told constantly that you are the product, or the property rather, of another human being, and you have no other choice but to eventually fold to their demands is something that would keep myself, and I feel like many others, up at night. It was to the point where she eventually did end up running away, and having her kids brought to her grandmother's house, where she lived in the attic. Now, not only does this dive into separation anxiety, but also complete isolation. She was in the attic of her grandmother's home for years, just month after month being in this cramped space, having to watch her children play and hear their voices, but not being able to interact with them out of the complete fear of being caught. The unimaginable pain that must have caused her. I remember sitting down with one of my colleagues who has a minor in psychology, and when she read the excerpts that I had picked out for this project, she began to shudder. And I thought that was a really interesting moment, because these events that we go through, that we read, we seldom relate to them. But after she read it, she put them down and looked at me, and she said, to quote, "I couldn't imagine being in this situation. I couldn't deal with it." And that also made me think of coping. How was it that she was able to cope with these things, having to cope with being so close to her children, the only thing that kept her going or kept her alive, but so far away from them mentally, not being able to talk to them or touch them or feel them or interact with them as a mother should, would cause untold emotional damage, untold anxiety, and just a host of other issues that we as modern people would weep constantly, and we would not be able to go on. And this is as free people, let alone as a slave. I personally thought that was a testament to the resolve of both the human mind and the individual that was Harriet Jacobs. Um, Now, the next three subjects I'd like to talk about: the adventures and escape of Moses Roper, the life of William Grimes, and the adventures of Henry Bibbs, all focus around the anxiety of escaping. Moses Roper describes it as the most terrifying event of his life, having to run for his freedom and being constantly under the anxiety of, what if I get caught? I can't stop. I have to keep running. Um, it's that sickening feeling of, if I rest for a moment, how I will be caught. I will be found. I will be taken back to this horrible situation that I'd been in. So his situation focuses more on the anxiety of it. Now, the life of William Grimes. Grimes was more concerned with the paranoia he felt while escaping, as he felt as if he could trust no one, as he mentions in his memoir. He was constantly worried that whoever he talked to, or whoever may have seen him, whether the people that saw him were in his head or otherwise, who could he trust? And that isolation from society and not being able to confide in anyone made his, as he describes it, his escape attempt much more difficult. And I think that's something we don't think about, the paranoia of having to do this thing. You cannot talk to anyone, you cannot let anyone see you. Even the people that are trying to help you may or may not be the people that will take you back. And finally, the adventures of Henry Bibbs. His escape, as he describes it, was a mix of terror and sadness. because as he knew that he was going towards this freedom, he was going towards everything he'd wanted, this escape from the oppressive system that he was under, it also caused a tinge of depression as he was running away from the life that he knew. He was running away from the people, the other slaves that he'd become relatively comfortable with, even though he was in such a terrible situation. So those three were particularly interesting to me as they focused on the pains of actually escaping slavery, this joyous, what you think to be a joyous moment, being utterly terrifying to a certain extent on account of the anxiety and paranoia. So, in closing, I'd like to talk about my overall takeaways from this project, which are the issues that we deal with today are not new. These mental maladies, if you will, are not novel. They have been felt by millions of other people and will be continued to be felt long after our time is done. And we cannot let the physical effects of an event such as slavery overshadow the emotional and psychological torment that these people also went through. Because more so, at least in my opinion, more so, what makes us human more so than our physical attributes or our physical ailments or the physical harm that's been done to us, it's how we process and feel and how we let these emotions not dictate our lives, but guide our lives, and how these thoughts shape us. And that was a major driving force for this project. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this gives you a bit more insight as to the emotional effects of slavery on slaves. Sorry, and have a nice day.